Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I am East Forest. This week I have a conversation with Brad Warner, who is a Zen expert. He has written a book called The Other Side of Nothing, the Zen Ethics of Time, Space, and Being. It's very enjoyable, easy to read, and some really cool concepts with lots of crossover with things that we get into on this podcast. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy that, and we will dive right into it. It's been yet another heavy week here for everyone on planet Earth. I mean, yet another mass shooting. It's something that we go through in America. I think I heard that there's been 1,900 mass shootings defined by anything over 4 people. So, and even that's 1,900 like within the last, I think it was, it might have been 20 years or something like that. I'm probably getting that wrong. The point is, it's far too many. It should be none. And that in itself is just a small amount of the amount of gun violence and gun deaths that happen just in our country. And it's confounding why it's so particularly acute here. And it's maddening. You know, there's nothing really much that you could think of that's quite worse than something like that happening in a school. I really don't know what to say about it other than that we all feel so many things, and I just want to speak to it because it's in the field. And I do pray for a time where we can have some kind of common sense solutions. At least we're moving in a direction of trying to do things, anything that we can do to help these things not happen at all, on all the levels. Instead of pointing fingers about why it's happening or it's this or it's that, why not just try things? And, you know, it's crazy to me that we can't even do that, even when we seem to collectively agree as a country that we want to try things. And we have these lobbies in power that have it's like this kind of minority power that it has been running a lot of things in our country, and it is true madness. In that way, the conversation we talk about today with Brad has to do about situational ethics, like the idea that people are looking for something to stand on, and it's ideas about right livelihood and even how to think about things and how to live our lives. And I think that's really at the root of what Buddhism is this idea of just basically, are there things we can do to have less suffering, to suffer less ourselves? Not a religion or something like you have to do. It's like these are guidelines that you might like to try because it's a navigational tool, a set of stars in a sense, to live life. And I think many of them are quite relevant in modernity as they were, millennia ago when they were conceived by the Buddha. So we'll get into that. I want to thank everyone who supports this podcast, particularly our friends on the Patreon. We had a new sign up. Let's see, we got Alyssa or Elisa. Apologies if I'm getting your name wrong. Thank you for signing up. And I just did we do a monthly Zoom council with a certain tier on the Patreon. But I think in June, what I'm going to try and do for the solstice-ish time, we're going to do one that's for everybody, meaning anyone who signs up on the Patreon, patreon.com/eastforest, can join us for the all council Zoom gathering, where I like to play a live guided musical meditation, and we get some time to witness one another in real time. And so, you can sign up just for the month and see if you like it and join us. And there's really no commitment. You can drop out anytime it feels right to you, but we do appreciate the sense of community there, and I appreciate the support. You can also support the podcast by sharing it, reviewing it on iTunes and Spotify, and, whatever you like to do. You send us your words of support, comments, and questions to info@eastforest.org. We will be back out on a few dates. Our Esalen retreat sold out, but there will be another one that is added December 9th through 12th. We have a wait list over at eastforest.org in which we will tell you when the tickets or whenever you can sign up, because it's not quite open for signups. It's limited to 40 people. So if you are interested, head over, get on the newsletter at eastforest.org, and we will let you know when that is. But I will have a couple other dates this summer, it's looking like, and hoping to have lots of things added and announced. So follow us on social media or, again, that newsletter, and we'll let you know when we're coming to your neck of the woods. Lastly, we had a Journey Space event in late May. There's going to be another one, I believe, on June 18th. There's more information about that at eastforest.org, too. That is where JourneySpace.com is a platform I co-founded to help guide journeys in real time with real support online and in community. And I create unique music that is not released elsewhere for those journeys, similar to my Music for Mushrooms album. They're long form and designed for an inner journey. I would contend, I mean, this is probably very anti-Zen, but I think it'd be great for just doing Zazen with this music. But maybe the nothingness is preferred. But hey, give it a try, see what works. And lastly, piece of housekeeping is the Ram Dass vinyl, I believe, was out of stock in the online store. That is back in stock. So if you're looking for a double vinyl of the Ram Dass album, it has all of his lyrics on the inside, some beautiful paintings by Liz Hilton, who did the painting of Ram Dass on the cover. And there's a painting on the back as well of Maharaji that's just stunning. We have it in our bedroom here, and it's a very powerful image for me to go to bed to and wake up to. I feel like I'm in this form of communication with it that's quite intense. But that's on the back of the vinyl, too. It's the only place that it actually currently appears. That's all. Eastforest.org. Hit the store button. Okay, so let's get into this conversation with our new friend, Brad Warner. Well, hey, Brad, thanks so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to diving into this conversation. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So you've got a book that you've written several books. This one's called The Other Side of Nothing, and it says Zen Ethics of Time, Space, and Being, with a very playful cover. But I would like to learn a little bit about you before, because there's some background is helpful. But let's just start with and I play slightly devil's advocate here, just to be like an observer against why are Zen ethics important at all? Like, why should people care about that?
Yeah, boy, I should have the ready answer for this, but it's a difficult one. I think Zen ethics are an interesting approach to ethics because when I was growing up, I remember, and I don't know if this is a common thing, but I remember somebody getting into an argument about situational ethics, and he was disparaging the idea of situational ethics, like that's a bad thing. You should have an ethical system that is, no matter what the situation, it's always the same. And what I found with the Zen approach to ethics is it is unabashedly situational ethics. It is the ethics that the situation that you're actually in calls for. And so it doesn't matter what sort of overriding ethical system you have, whatever the situation that you're in at this moment dictates what you should do. Having said that, there are what we call the precepts in Buddhism, which are actually, I was just reading about how this is actually a translation of a Sanskrit word sila, which doesn't really mean precept so much as perfection. So it's a weird little background there. But these precepts are kind of similar to the Ten Commandments. In fact, I think 3 or 4 of them are exactly the same. Do not kill, do not steal, do not lie, that kind of thing. But even in the case of those ethics, it is dependent on the situation. So the precepts are given because in almost every situation, those are the way you want to go. And therefore, people who are maybe not as adept at handling situational ethics as they come up. But even those can be transcended if the circumstances call for it, and that's actually part of the ethical system. And I really think that people these days are looking for ethics. They're looking for something, some better way to live, but they're often finding ethical systems that are based in sort of not situational ethics, but things that are sort of solid, to where you end up doing bad things in order to make good things happen, for example.
That's
This
pretty
kind of
common these
idea.
days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I want to actually ask you about one of those you mentioned, the do not or not killing.
yeah.
But let me just start then. Let's just get a little bit of context for how a guy like yourself uh, got into this subject, and quite deeply so. You have an interesting background. I think it might be useful to the conversation.
Yeah, yeah, I've gone over my background so many times in interviews. It's hard to know what to put in and leave out. But basically, I in the early '80s, I was the bass player for a punk rock band, hardcore punk band called Zero Defects, and I was really, really into that scene, that hardcore punk scene, which was very much based on ethics. A lot of the
Mm.
different punk rock scenes were not. A lot of different punk rock scenes were based on getting drunk and slamming into each other and stuff. But the scene that we were part of was really influenced by what was going on in Washington D.C. with bands like Minor Threat, who had this idea of, for example, straight edge, where you don't drink, you don't do drugs, you have
Yeah.
an ethical outlook towards sex and things like that, but it was part of the hardcore scene. So I got into that. At the same time, I was a university student at Kent State University in Ohio, and I happened to take a class called Zen Buddhism just because I'd grown up partly in Nairobi, Kenya, in Africa,
Hmm.
and I'd been exposed there. There's a huge Indian population in East Africa, and I kind of became fascinated by their religion and culture. And when I came back, I was 11 when I came back, so it was several years before I got into college, but I wanted to take a college course on Hinduism. And I couldn't find a college course on Hinduism, but I could find one on Zen Buddhism. So I took that and I thought close enough. And that's what got me into Zen Buddhism. And then years after that, I took a job in Japan as an English teacher, which led me to getting another job in Japan working for a company that makes Japanese monster movies. So we were founded, the company I worked for was founded by the guy who invented Godzilla, although we weren't the company that made Godzilla. He'd split from those guys. And
Mm.
they made sort of Godzilla-esque uh, movies and TV shows. So while working there, I started studying with a Japanese Buddhist. I'd been interested in Zen. So in college, I had an American Buddhist teacher, a Zen Buddhist teacher. And when I got to Japan, I found another Japanese Buddhist teacher who ordained me and also very much encouraged me to start writing about Zen, which I ended up writing a book which was called Hardcore Zen, which is my first book. It came out in 2003, and I've been writing books about Zen ever since. Here's the
Yeah.
short version.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a musician as well, so
I can tell.
I
Well, I
kind
guess
of.
the folks at home can't see the background I'm seeing, but
Oh yeah. Well, they will. There is a video version of this
oh,
for
okay, good.
those who want to see it. Um, yeah, they're actually. I'll just go there for now. You had this line in the beginning that's something I've often referred to. You talk about how we're all musicians in a symphony, as
Yeah.
a kind of a way of looking at what is life. And I'm always really interested in those bigger questions too. And it's often only can be summed up in like metaphors or even like music itself
Hmm.
or any kind of art as a way of sort of describing it, the indescribable. Um, can you can you dig into that statement a bit more? This idea of that being
Yeah.
what it means to be this.
And I'll try to do it from memory because it wasn't a metaphor that I made up. It's one that I found somebody else making. I think Carlo Rovelli, who's a physicist, had said it, and then I found Dainin Katagiri. I think it was Dainin Katagiri. It was as a contemporary Zen teacher. If it wasn't Katagiri Roshi, it was somebody else, but who had said almost the same thing as Rovelli, who's a physicist who writes interesting books about physics,
Mm-hmm.
about how we are one way to look at what we are in the context of the wider universe is like musicians in a symphony. So everybody has to play their own part, and your own part in the symphony is unique to whatever instrument you're playing, and your own part in the world is unique to whoever you are. But you're also trying to harmonize, or harmonize is probably the best word I can come up with on short notice, with the rest of the musicians, which is the rest of humanity, with even beyond humanity, with the rest of the the universe, the world and the universe, and kind of going along with that and not going against it. And in terms of ethics, uh, when you go wrong ethically is, in extending the metaphor, similar to playing the wrong note. If you're in a symphony orchestra, you're doing the wrong thing, and it makes everything, your little wrong note makes the whole thing sound terrible. So that's why we have to be kind of careful with what we do.
Well, in that metaphor, like, who's the conductor, or is that even relevant?
I never thought about extending it to a conductor.
Let's just play with
Uh,
it for a second. I'm just
yeah,
curious, like, where it goes for you.
Yeah, I don't know. I think if you want to go in the Zen way, we're all the conductor in a sense. So there isn't. So we don't have this idea of a God who is separate from the rest of us. Although I did write another book earlier called "There Is No God and He Is Always With You," about the idea that Zen Buddhism does have a concept of God. It's just not God as separate and out there away from you. So I suppose, you're kind of, if you wanted to put a conductor in there, maybe in the sense of the path I've taken, you have a teacher, and you have somebody who you kind of look to as a kind of a conductor, as a kind of somebody to give you a sense of where to go. Although we don't look at this at the teacher as infallible, so we have to kind of be aware that we are looking to our teacher for a sense of where to go, but also that our teacher has the same problems that we do, just
Mm.
by being a human. So there's a certain amount of, you have to kind of use your own judgment too. You can't just blindly follow.
Well, what do you think about the role of the teacher today in modernity, with information at our fingertips and people sort of dabbling and sampling? I mean,
Yeah.
what are the pros and cons? Or also, when it's almost like a meme
Yeah.
today is a kind, we have these teachers that they take these collective ideas in a sense, versus an old school approach of going somewhere and working with someone for years, perhaps on end.
Well, that's what I did. I had two main teachers, one American and one Japanese, that I already mentioned, and it was an in-person sort of thing. It was me and my teacher, and both of these teachers had other students as well, but it was it was a face-to-face thing, and it has to be conducted that way. There's
Mm.
definitely a certain amount you can learn sort of from books, or these days from videos and other sort of things that are out there. I do a YouTube channel. In fact, I just got done with a YouTube video just before I got on with this interview. So I do it 3 days a week. I do videos, and there's a certain amount you can learn from those things, and they're beneficial. But I think ultimately you need an in-person sort of teacher, and this is something that's kind of enshrined in Buddhism as a necessity, and it's always something that I have difficulty talking about, because the questions people often ask are, where do I find that teacher? And I go, well, I don't know, I found mine by accident. you know and they'll ask, can you be my teacher? And usually the answer is, the logistics are most often, for most people who ask me that, impossible. um, they want a kind of remote thing, and I think your teacher has to be somebody you find locally, who can actually see you and interact with you in person. um, but of course, there are also these spectacular stories that get put on the news every once in a while, of teachers going terribly wrong. It was interesting
Yeah.
to see that I don't know, 5 or more years ago this happened. It seemed like a bunch of Buddhist teachers made big news for going bad, which I was surprised at, but not well. I was surprised at how big the news was, because I didn't think anybody cared about Buddhist teachers. I think they
Right.
worry about a Catholic teacher who went wrong, a Catholic priest or something who went wrong. But Buddhist teachers who go wrong, they usually have such small followings anyway, that who even cares? But big newspapers were carrying the stories of these things, so I found that intriguing. And
Would
now
you,
everybody thinks that Buddhist teachers are terrible. So
well, sometimes those things have their own collective momentum. One
Yeah.
story, and then there's more pylons. But do you think though? I mean, times have changed dramatically. Not just like the information and how we gather it, but like you talked about situational ethics. I mean, the situation itself is dynamic and very different than it was not too long ago. So, I mean, the ethics you're speaking of, and there's a lot of this came from a long time ago. And
Yeah.
from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the Buddha wanted his system, in a sense, to be malleable to the
Yeah.
times. So, if that's the case, what do you see needs to shift, and what needs to bend in order to really be relevant and really the most effective for what we're
Yeah.
facing as a people?
I mean, it's a hard question to answer because you're right. The Buddha. One thing I think is great about Buddhism is the Buddha did want his system to be malleable, and I think people in the West tend to mistakenly approach Buddhism the way a lot of the Abrahamic religions are presented, which is we've got this text which was written between 5 and 2,000 years ago.
Constitutionalists,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, and then it's set, and that's the way it is to be forever. And Buddhism isn't like that, and some people find that difficult to deal with in Buddhism, that it is so malleable. But as far as things changing, I think things change and they stay the same. So it's there's a kind of mistaken view I see among people who sort of imagine that Buddhism comes from a kind of pristine past in which everything was great, and now
Hmm.
everything is much more complicated than it was then. But things were complicated then too. One of the things I put in the book that I could bring up that's like this is I was giving example from I think it was a Huffington Post article that was kind of coming from
Yeah.
that standpoint. The authors seem to think that see, these days we're embroiled in larger systems, economic systems, and how we can't, we have to be careful and all this and that about our livelihoods. And I pointed out that Dogen, who is the guy that I admire the most among Buddhists, who was 800 years ago in Japan, a Buddhist master who wrote a lot of books, his main source of finances was a samurai warlord. So you talk about people being embroiled in larger, embroiled, that's not the right word, but entangled in larger systems. It's not something new. He had to he was definitely not a rich man. Dogen wasn't, but he was supported by a rich man who got his money in not a very ethical way, by being a warlord. So and even the Buddha, it goes back to that. So there's a lot of stuff that I think we can learn from the past, and to assume that everything is completely different now would be a mistake. I mean, we do have technologies at our fingertips, often literally these days, that other people don't, that are incredibly powerful, and I think that's something we have to be concerned about. But then again, there's only so much an individual can do about that, and that's one of the things when you take something like climate change, and people are very worried about climate change. And of course, that's something that we have to be concerned about. But we also have to realize that I, as an individual, can only do so much to affect climate change if we want to take that as an example. And you do those things, but worrying about the larger the big picture is often kind of just a distraction, from doing what you need to do at this moment in the situation that you're actually faced with, because you can only do what you can do.
Well, that's something that's different today, is that you know about it. I mean, we know about all
Yeah,
of it, and just the level of information that we are dealing with. If anything, zazen, in a sense, becomes more valuable. But I
yeah,
do hear you that the sub state, like the basic bedrock of it all, is the same. The human experience is the same. But you brought up the chapter about that had the Huffington article,
Yeah.
and I believe in that chapter you're talking about sort of like the negative aspects, in a sense, of meditation. You didn't put it like that,
Oh
but
yeah.
let's
Yeah.
dig into that. What are there? What are the challenges, or perhaps we're always talking about the positive aspects of meditation.
Yeah, that came up, and it's something I've done. I've done a bunch of videos on my YouTube channel about this, so it's something that I talk about a lot, and I put it in several books, including this one. But it comes up. It seems like every few months there was a kind of a cycle where an article would come up, and people would start forwarding it to me about the dangers of meditation. And the dangers of meditation are usually the article that I bring up in the book was a story of a woman who goes on a meditation retreat, and she has some really bizarre experiences that end up leading her to kill herself. And this
Yeah.
is this was widely reported. Usually, it doesn't go as far as people committing suicide, but this kind of happens from time to time if people dive in too quickly to very intensive meditation practices. And it's one of the things I have a bit of concern about, because these kind of things are becoming trendy these days, where people will do these very intense meditation practices with zero preparation for it. And my own experience of that was I did Zazen by myself every day for between half an hour and an hour a day for more than a decade before I ever did a Zen retreat. And I think I may have waited a little bit too long in my case, but I think if you're going to get into meditation, you should have some experience, maybe a couple of years of it at least, before diving into these really intensive practices where they'll actually separate you from, you go into a monastery or some secluded place, and you are meditating for 10 hours a day for 10 days, in a very, high
So,
pressure almost circumstances.
Vipassana, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah, those, and I've never been to one of those retreats, so I can't say how they're all conducted. But I think if you go to that kind of a retreat without any preparation, you're more likely to have that sort of weird experience. Actually, I would say, generally speaking, you're probably unlikely to have that experience, but it makes that experience more likely than if you got into it slowly. So people who have psychological problems anyway, who go into those kind of intensive retreats, it can bring up a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it seems like more than likely you'd bail or you'd
Yeah,
be bored or distracted
yeah.
versus psychotic. But
Yeah. That's, and I pointed that out in the book too. Yeah, the most likely thing that's going to happen is you get so bored that you run away, or you just can't deal with it anymore because it's just so dull. That's what meditation is for most people when they start out. And I think that's fine. I think the boredom aspect of it is perfectly fine. And I think that's actually one of the good aspects of the practice. But if you have psychological problems, the fact of sort of opening your mind and experiencing silence can make those problems kind of come to the surface quickly. And one of the things I've found is that since meditation has become trendy, there are a lot of people who are into teaching meditation who probably don't know as much about meditation as they ought to. You know, um, I think on the one hand, it's really nice that healthcare and psychiatric care professionals are getting into meditation as one of the things in their toolboxes. But on the other hand, I think certain people in that realm don't understand the actual power of what they're dealing with, because they think, well, you're just sitting quietly by yourself, and that's great. That's easy. But sitting quietly by yourself can be an extremely intense experience. My own experience with it initially was like most people's, was intense boredom. But after a few years, the other sort of intense aspects of the practice started to manifest. And by then I had a teacher, and I had something, sort of somebody to talk to about it, and to to just tell me, yeah, this is normal, that's okay. But if you need a sincere person who understands what this can lead to tell you that, I think.
Do you think there's a difference between meditation and presencing?
Oh,
When
I
you
don't
say,
know presencing. What's
I mean, what is it? Whatever it means to you, as opposed to just like sitting and being. I just want to stay here. I'm going to
Yeah,
breathe.
well, I mean, is the kind of zazen that I learned is called a shikantaza, which means just sitting, and it's the most bare bones form, and you're sitting for the sake of sitting and not trying to make anything happen. What tends to be the case in the things that are usually called or advertised as meditation is that there's often a goal seeking component. There's sort of something that you're supposed to achieve. You're
Yeah,
either supposed to have an awakening experience or some kind of profound experience, and people are kind of often taught to push themselves towards those experiences, and I think that's where you can get trouble. Again, I should say that probably most people, even those who push themselves towards having enlightenment experiences and special experiences, are mostly going to experience boredom. but sometimes, if the person is more adept at pushing or more ambitious, you get to you can get into states of mind that are unfamiliar and can be scary. And the other version is the state of mind that is unfamiliar and blissful. And both of them are problems, but people don't tend to worry too much about the bliss because bliss feels great. But the bliss can also trick you into seeking more bliss. You know,
yeah.
you're forever trying to find some state of mind that came to you unbidden at one point in meditation. I've fallen into this trap myself, you know, and gotten stuck there, and that can be another sort of problem that people have. Although that one doesn't usually lead you to go crazy, so
It's a kind
people don't
of
worry about it.
desire, right, in
Yeah,
itself. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, you do say something about like zazen itself as enlightenment.
yeah,
So I mean, is that kind of what you're talking about?
yeah. That was Dogen's great sort of innovation. He was 800 years ago in Japan. Buddhism had been around for a few centuries, but it was mainly a kind of a subject of intellectual study at that point, and there wasn't a whole lot of practice, meditation practice. It did exist, but it wasn't such a big part of it. But what meditation practice did exist in Japan in Dogen's time was based on trying to have an experience, trying to have a satori, enlightenment experience, or sometimes it's called kensho, but it's a kind of special experience. And Dogen had done that kind of practice for, he started when he was very young, like at 11 or 12 years old, and he'd done it for about 10 years by then and had some experiences that had been classified as satori, but he felt like this isn't it. This isn't what I wanted from this practice. So he went to China and found a teacher who taught him that zazen is the enlightenment experience. So no matter what it feels like, so it doesn't matter if your zazen, your seated meditation, zazen being the seated meditation that we do, the ungoal seeking meditation, that even if it feels boring or dull or like this is the worst zazen anyone's ever done in the history of zazen, which is usually what mine feels like, even those moments of zazen are the experience of enlightenment, and learning to see it that way is part of the practice that Dogen brought back from China, and that my teacher, the lineage that I was part of, uh, tried to reify, not reify, tried to do.
Yeah. I mean, in that sense, it's like creativity in a sense where you're happy and responsible for the labor versus the fruits.
Yeah.
It seems like the act of sitting is the thing in a way, as opposed to any result of any kind.
No, that's exactly it. I tell you, probably as a musician, you get this all the time. People want to they want the fruits of the musician life, whatever they think it is. They want the ability to play.
Waiting
Yeah,
in airports, nervousness,
yeah, that's what it usually
uncertainty.
ends up
Yeah.
being. Yeah, but they want to be Van Halen shredding on stage,
Yeah.
eruption right away. And if you're ever going to get to that stage, you have to go through the process where it's just kind of bad for a long time.
Oh yeah.
And that's the same way with the Zen practice. That there are those moments of awakening, and that they exist. And I don't want to say they don't, or even say that they're not important, because they can be very important. But you have to be you have to just get in. You have to learn to like it, or at least learn to tolerate it. I do zazen every day, as I said, and most of the time I don't particularly like it. These days, I sort of just do it the way I always talk about it in terms of brushing your teeth. You could think of a lot of reasons you brush your teeth, but when push comes to shove, it's just that thing that you do in the morning, and you should do it because you're going to feel bad if you don't, and that's the way I approach zazen. I know I'm not going to feel right unless I do it every morning, and so I do it. But it doesn't mean I love it every time, or that it's this moment of incredible spiritual whatever every time. I mean, mostly it's just kind of boring.
Well, it's a stunning endorsement,
Yeah, I
but
know.
in that, let's go with this metaphor for a bit, though. It's like brushing your teeth because A, you want to keep your teeth, and B, other people appreciate it when you brush your teeth.
Yeah.
Do you think there's an element of compassion in doing zazen for others?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's one of the things people. It's one of the complaints that a lot of people have about zazen, about meditation practice in general, is that it's a selfish practice. It's like something you only do to make yourself feel good, and I think that's a mistake. I think it's something you do for yourself, but you also do it for others. Because I don't. I know that I function better if I do my zazen. That I don't bring my problems to other people quite as much if I do zazen every day. And I only noticed this when I first started the practice. I wasn't gung ho from day one. I guess on day one, excuse me, I was very gung ho. I was very excited about it at the beginning, but after a month or two, I just felt like blah, and I wasn't committed to it, so I just kind of gave up. And after I gave up doing the Zen practice every day, that's when I realized it took me. I had to go through this. I don't know how many times, at least 5 times or more, where I would give up doing zazen for a while, then the noise level in my head would just grow and grow and grow, and I'd be going, well, what's going on, what's wrong with my life, why am I so irritable, and why is this? And then I'd take stock of what was happening and go, yeah, I gave up that zazen a couple months ago, I better start doing it again. And I had to do this over and over before I finally learned that I'm just going to have to do this every day. I'm just stuck with it.
Yeah, yeah. Here's a random question, but it's related. Do you think Zen Buddhism is the least funny of the various sects of Buddhism?
I don't know. I don't think it's the least funny. I think there's a lot of jokes in Zen that people kind of miss.
They're dry. They're
Yeah,
good dry jokes.
they're dry jokes, but there are jokes. I wish I could think of one off the top of my head, but I can't. But there are a lot of the koan stories, which are the short sort of teaching stories in Zen, and if you understand them, a lot of what at first seems to be impenetrable non sequiturs is actually a joke that you don't get until you practice for a while.
They're old grandpa monk jokes,
Yeah,
that it's
yeah.
like you need to get it. Okay, I want to talk about something we might disagree on because that's often interesting for people to listen to.
Okay, sure.
There's a chapter in there about intoxication,
Yeah,
and which we could talk about in general. But let's take this within the context of, again, a malleable ethics.
yeah,
And here we are today, and we're in a crisis. And let's say you view this crisis at its core as a spiritual crisis. Like people not, as you said, looking for ethics, looking for something to stand on, and trying to find their navigation inside a world that's collapsing and transitioning.
Yeah.
For some people, psychedelic therapy is quite useful for them because it's a kind of illumination or cracks through a shell that is so thick for them, and it allows them to see something maybe they couldn't have seen otherwise.
Yeah.
And I think your position is more like taking the helicopter to the mountain is not as valuable as climbing the mountain,
Yeah.
which I can understand. But what about like we're in a situation where we need change quickly, and not everyone can climb the mountain?
Yeah. I mean, I understand that argument, and I have to be careful what I say, because the problem with endorsing any of that stuff is you don't know who's hearing your endorsement, and you don't know where they're going to take it. So I've one of the reasons I moved recently is because I was dealing with a neighbor who constantly was abusing drugs, and he's not without his spiritual side, and I suspect maybe he got into it for those reasons at first, and now he's just kind of an addict who causes a lot of trouble. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so those substances, I think, can. This is where I'm almost afraid to say they can be valuable, but I think they can in certain for certain people in certain times. But it's something that you have to be real careful with, because they also um, there's one of the ways it's usually put when people translate the precept against using drugs into English is don't use drugs that cause heedlessness. I've had my own experiences with LSD and mushrooms and marijuana and things like that, and there is a spiritual dimension to it, but I also see that there's a certain recklessness that seems to come with it, and maybe it's similar in nature to the people who dive into a very intense meditation practice without any preparation for it.
Mm.
And so, you're kind of you're gonna be in this altered state of mind, and the altered state of mind will allow you to see things that your usual state of mind kind of masks or covers over. But at the same time, a lot of the filters are also gone. A lot of the things that keep you from doing stupid things, and just kind of going the wrong way, that can be, and also introducing something from the outside. There's a tradition in Buddhism, in Zen Buddhism, the kyosaku, which is a stick. And at a lot of Zen temples, when you're sitting, there's a guy who comes along observing your practice, and if he sees that you're kind of going wonky, he hits you with the stick. And the
It's very
stick can
zen.
be, yeah, and the stick can be very valuable, and a lot of people think it's a great tool for getting you back on track. And I was at a retreat where somebody was talking about this in the Q&A session at a lecture to my teacher, and going on and on very eloquently about the value of the stick. And my teacher said, well, yes, all of that is true, but I think it's more valuable to learn to wake up by yourself. so so I think that's kind of the bottom line. Any of these states that are accessible via drugs are also accessible via other means, because they wouldn't be accessible via drugs unless they were there already, unless it was already present. The drug doesn't make something happen. It just kind of, I think it kind of shuts down certain areas of the brain so that other areas become more accessible or more obvious. And that can be valuable if you never suspected those aspects of existence were there, which often a lot of people don't even suspect it. But again, you're also you're shutting down something that maybe is there for a good reason, and that's the problem with it.
Okay, but what if you could see this idea of the stick? It's a kind of training wheel in
Yeah,
Zen. Like, so hopefully the idea is, yeah, well, you need the stick to learn when you're getting off course, and then eventually you can do that yourself. And similarly, in psychedelic therapy, perhaps it's in a kind of illumination that's quite temporary. You have to come back to this reality.
Yeah.
And as you said, for some folks, of course, it's more valuable to find these states in a more gradual way. But I think for a lot of people, we're so dominated by mind today that for the vast majority of people, the thought of sitting and zazen and doing years before even going to
Yeah.
a meditation retreat, for them today, they're just like, man, I'm struggling. Like, and I don't even know if there is more. There isn't more. I think about for the
Yeah.
rationalist materialist type person.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of think I can't completely deny that, but then again, I think about the 60s culture in which everybody got very excited about, LSD is going to free us all, and then it didn't, and then it went
Mm-hmm.
terribly wrong, and now, and I think there's a kind of a sense of trying to come back to that and get it right this time. And I wonder if we've collectively learned enough. We'll see whether, and there's nothing I can do to prevent it. It's just going to happen. But I think you got to be really cautious about that stuff because they can be so seductive and so attractive. And there is a certain kind of person who, once they get their hands on it, like my neighbor, um, that that's they're going to keep going to it again and again and
Yeah.
again, and it's just going to become this downward spiral that I don't know. I really worry about this guy if he'll ever get out of his downward spiral that the drugs have gotten him on. And I've seen that, town I went to college in and stayed in a lot after college, Kent, Ohio, was kind of full of those people. It's this kind of old hippie town. Um, Full of people who'd gone down that path for reasons that were probably noble at first, but then they kind of ended up stuck. Yeah.
Well, self delusion is a danger, and you do need containers and support around this. You talked about preparation that's needed for a meditation retreat. I would completely agree for any type of mind expanding experience. It's like you need to have something to stand on, a kind of
Yeah.
practice to work with and support. I mean, do you think it's possible that people can have similar delusional states that can happen through perhaps meditation, or they get off course if they don't have a teacher?
Oh yeah, you can. Yeah. I mean, that's part of the dangers of meditation. That's one of the reasons for having a teacher and having a good teacher, which is often, another step to take, which is difficult. But you can, and it's happened. There's a story. I don't know if I've put this in more than one of my books, and I'm not sure if it's in The Other Side of Nothing. I know it's in a book called Sit Down and Shut Up. But there was the the incident in Japan. I think it was 1994, when I was living in Japan, where this guy who was a leader of a religious cult put sarin gas on the Tokyo subway systems, and several, I think 11 people died, and like hundreds were sickened, some of them for the rest of their life, by this nerve gas this guy had put on. And he was a cult leader, but he was also he'd also started very sincerely, but he'd gotten off course because he'd had a few experiences. The cult leader, what's his name? Asahara was his name, who had these experiences that were very profound, and he didn't have a teacher, and so he was kind of teaching based on his own experiences, which he'd, as an individual, turned into something weird. But there was a story I read in a paper, an English language Japanese newspaper called Yomiuri Shimbun. And it was about a Zen teacher who, after this gas attack happened, he ended up counseling a lot of former members of the cult. And so he read up on Asahara's experiences, and he noticed that they were very similar to the experiences that he, this Zen teacher, had had during his Zen training. But in his case, he'd had a teacher who, whenever he brought these experiences up to his teacher said, "Okay, yeah, you gotta stop that. You got to get back. You got to get back to your grounding in this world, and not go off into these wonderlands, which are often available to people who meditate and to people who use psychedelics too. Often it's easier to get there with psychedelics, frankly, than with meditation. But those wonderland experiences have a dark side, which is always there. It's like the front and back of the coin. I've got a guitar pick, but
Yeah.
the back side of the coin is always there, even if you're only looking at the front side. So the dark side is always there, even if you're only looking at the wonderland, beautiful side. So being aware of that is what grounding is all about.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Like all these states are there. It's just us accessing them in different ways at different times and
Yeah.
knowing how to navigate them. Well, as we round this out, what do you think people get wrong about Zen, or any
Oh God.
misconceptions, particularly like in the context of our situation now,
Yeah,
modern
well, I
times?
mean, Zen is. I have an Instagram. I'm not plugging my Instagram, but one of the things I like to do on my Instagram is I just find Zen things. The Zen. My favorite is this in West Hollywood. There's the Zen marijuana dispensary with this fat green Buddha as their emblem. So, this kind of points out the misconceptions of Zen, that it's this kind of a blissed out, chill out sort of state, and certainly blissing out and chilling out is part of the Zen experience. It's one of the most attractive parts of it, but there's a whole other side to it which is integrated into the whole of life. So people who are initially, like I was interested in Zen because I wanted to find that blissed out, chilled out sort of thing
Yeah.
that was highly advertised. But there's a lot more to it than that. There's a whole the ethical talking about the ethical aspects of Zen. I thought in terms of this new book was a good way to get into the more holistic approach that Zen gets into, because a lot of people forget that. A lot of people want to get into the chill out stuff and they forget, well, there's a whole ethical, moral side to Zen, which often people don't want, and I see people who come to me sometimes who, once we get into that stuff, they're like, "Ooh, I didn't think it was going to be, a religion." And I actually don't think Zen really qualifies in the subset of religions, but there are certain aspects of it that are very much like a religion, and the ethics are part of that.
Yeah, the commonality. I mean, I think it's rooted in the idea of uh, lowering your suffering, really.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, it's more just like, look, this is what we've found works to have an easier life.
yeah. And that's a really important part of it. I mean, the ethics, when I first encountered them, I thought they were rules that had to be followed, in order to avoid punishment or something, by God or Buddha. But it's more like suggestions, strong suggestions, I would say, to have a better life.
Yeah. And I guess I said I'd circle back to the not killing one. I guess I should close that out. But um, this idea of, not killing, and it's sort of like ideas like telling the truth in a sense, and like, what is truth? And it gets to like, what is
Yeah,
killing?
yeah,
And is that even possible? And I thought that just was a really interesting discussion. It just reminded me of a story I might have mentioned on this podcast before, where I went to a talk of a Tibetan Buddhist in our little town in southern Utah. So they had brought him in, and he went on this long discussion about basically this subject. And there's a lot of ranchers out there. We all, a lot of cows, and a lot of people hunt, and
yeah,
he was talking about eating meat. And he was just kind of saying, like, look, I mean, do what you want, but it is what it is, cause
yeah,
and effect. And someone was really pushing him back, and they went to this long thing about it. And then we all went to dinner, and he orders a steak. And
yeah,
and then I noticed, as one more level of intrigue, he cut the steak in half and he gave half of it to a dog that was lurking around. And I thought that was like an insurance plan or something. But
Maybe.
yeah. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there. And I don't know if you had anything you want to add about that
That's
chapter. I
it.
just thought it was an interesting, rich subject.
It is. It is an interesting. And Tibetan Buddhists are kind of famous for eating meat. Both of my teachers, neither of my teachers were vegetarians, and I am, and that's kind of an issue that I struggled with. Both of my teachers thought it was better to be a vegetarian, but neither of them was, and I thought that was kind of interesting.
Right.
You know,
Well, I can understand that. Yeah.
yeah, my Japanese teacher was just like, it's force of habit. I've eaten meat all my life, so I'm not going to stop. And my American teacher had actually been told by a doctor that he shouldn't be a vegetarian because he had certain nutritional, deficiencies and stuff. So he didn't really like eating meat, but he did. And so, yeah, I don't think even the strictest vegan can get away from killing. Killing is going to happen, and it's part of how, that's how life moves forward. Life moves forward by taking other lives, and you can't get away from that no matter how hard you try. But I do think there's some value in trying, which is why I'm still a vegetarian. So,
well, we'll leave it at that.
yeah.
Is there anything else you think could be good for us to get into, or you'd like to say, aside from where people can find your work in the book?
I never know what to say when people ask that. I just think this ethical stuff is important, and the book also deals with non-duality, the whole idea of the oneness of the universe.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the way you can understand Buddhist ethics is to understand this idea of non-duality, the what is the interpenetration, or I don't know the right words, but the fact that we are
Interdependence.
Interdependent, and that we are in a sense a kind of reflection of everything. We as individuals are a reflection of the whole universe, and sometimes it doesn't feel that way, but that's the fact, and that's something else that that this book goes into. So people might be interested in that.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, you have a really easy way of writing and reading, and I think it's great, man. So,
well, thank you.
Thank you for taking the time. And I'm sure we'll put a link to this in the show notes, but I don't know, is there a centralized place for all these other things you're talking about, like your YouTube and so forth?
Yeah, I have a blog. It's just hardcorezen.info, and I haven't been keeping up the blog as much as I should, although lately I'm adding more stuff to it. But that's also the hub to where you get to everything else. And my YouTube channel is youtube.com/hardcorezen. So everything is Hardcore Zen. That was my first book. So if you look up Hardcore Zen, you'll find me somehow.
Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. It's nice to meet you.
Thank you, and nice to meet you too. Nice to be interviewed.
Thank you, Brad, for coming on the show. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I do highly recommend his book, The Other Side of Nothing. We'll put the link in the show notes as well. This song that you're hearing in the background is called Soulmate, and it features Clinton Patterson on the trumpet. This is another track off the Still Possible album that has been releasing week by week, and it culminates on June 17th with the full album. And we're going to have a video coming out for the Lone Wolf track that came out first. We also released a video for a track from the Possible album, the song What Is. That's really, really amazing that we just put up on the youtube.com/eastforestmusic. And if you haven't seen some of the different videos that we've put out over the years, that's where they live. But the What Is video features some dance by Rob James McLean. And he actually made this video on his own. And we saw it, and I said, hey, man, I'd love to put this into like a video landscape format and use it and feature you. And it's stunning what he did. His movement and the visuals, this beautiful shot near the ocean with these reflections. Highly recommend you check it out. But the Still Possible album will keep rolling out, and I hope you are enjoying these B-sides, essentially, from the Possible sessions. All right, my friends, thank you again to everyone on the council, patreon.com/eastforest for supporting this podcast. Check it out if you want to sign up this month. We'll probably be doing an all-council gathering, live stream type deal, musical meditation and gathering in the month of June. But you can hop in anytime you like. Until then, keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit. But if you do, you know what to do. Do it with grace.